Hello, friends, and welcome to my next kind of bite-sized, if you will, mental health talk. Now, before we begin, I just want to clarify that I am not a licensed psychologist. I should never replace the help and assistance and care of a licensed psychologist. I am a third semester student of psychology, but I also um, being a student of life and experiencing my own life and mental health challenges, I do speak through that filter of personal experience. So if it helps you, and I hope it does, great. But again, I should not replace professional help. You should absolutely seek that if for any reason you feel you need to. There is no shame in that. And it is wonderful and necessary, and there doesn't need to be anything wrong with you to get therapy. In fact, sometimes it's just good to recognize situations that have happened to you in the past so that you can either move forward with more compassion, empathy for yourself, but to also move forward knowing those things at all and just looking out for different signs to help you out later in life. So, with that in mind, friend Joshua had I asked, what would you like to hear about today? And his response was that he wants to know why childhood trauma would lead you to make bad relationship decisions and keep repeating those bad relationship decisions well into adulthood. So I'm going to make this a two-parter because this is a very deep subject. I mean, and it's really almost two different subjects, right? It's how childhood trauma affects us and why do we keep repeating bad behaviors, things that we know aren't good for us. So we're going to tackle the first one today, and that is complex emotional trauma. And this is Mr. President, my buddy. When you think of trauma, you might think of having gone to war, being in a car accident, having this huge breakup, particular situations that you will often refer to as before this time or after this time in my life. And the same can be said, by the way, for when children are introduced into your life. Not that that is trauma, but it is a singular life-changing event that will divide and define your life at times. So it is perfectly normal to think in those terms, but complex emotional trauma is the little things that kind of make up who you possibly became. Some people who had, by the way, childhood trauma do not need help today. They did not I'm sorry, that was a poor choice of words because it is not under their control. Those things did not continue to affect them either because they got help or they just are a different person. For many of us, it does affect who we are today through no fault of our own. And we're going to talk about those people and myself, because that is me. And I suspect friend Joshua who asked. So all the things that make us up. And they could be physical abuse. They could be sexual abuse. They can include caregivers who would swear at us, who would insult us, humiliate. I don't know if you ever heard the response to doing something, making a mistake as, well, see, that's what happens when you do that. It's almost as if they are assigning guilt and blame to you for living life, for being a kid, for growing up and learning from experiences. There will be blame. Perhaps your family was not supportive of each other, or you, a family member that didn't, caregiver, they didn't fan the flames of your passions and understand that maybe for a couple of months, cheerleading was your passion, and you have decided to change your mind and not pursue that anymore. People who didn't support both of those decisions. An adult who maybe smoked, drank, used street drugs. These are all forms of complex childhood trauma and abuse. Again, there is a lot of guilt involved for people who this has happened to, of how could I have prevented this? Why didn't I stop it at the time? What could I have done? And something that I learned from from a psychologist, I'm not, is in order to really stop blaming yourself for some of those things, first, I want you to find a photograph of yourself at the age that this abuse began. I want you to look at that little kid. I want you to realize how innocent that person was, and how young. And even if this started in your teen years, still, I want you to take a really good look at that and realize that that person is not to blame. Okay? First big step. Don't think that you are responsible for any of it. You're not. But you're not alone. And again, these will affect you. These can affect you well into adulthood, possibly for the rest of your life. 43% of our fears start in adulthood. That's, wow, that's a big deal. And a lot of that from how we grew up younger. Just think about that. It's nearly half of all people who have a fear resulting from their childhood. And when I ask you to think of your childhood, maybe it's ice cream dribbling down your chin and trips to Disneyland, and you remember great things, but you may also have snapshots of the aforementioned abuse. And sometimes that makes things choppy, because you will have these little boxes of negative experience interspersed with what most would consider to be a supportive, wonderful, happy childhood. And it's going to mess up your timeline a little. In fact, you may have gaping holes in your memory when it comes to things. You may, like myself, sometimes have those negative experiences overshadow all of the good ones that may have happened to you as a kid, when you went on to become or to hang out with a loving caregiver like my grandparents, time with my mom and many stepdads. That looms over that, and it darkens it, and it kind of messes up the entire past, despite both happening. So Joshua's question was, why do we keep making the same bad relationship decisions based on childhood programming? So we're going to look at the childhood programming, which is feeling unloved, not being supportive, being told we aren't good enough. And there's probably a gamut more. I have board games in my video right now. These will affect what you may look forward to, unfortunately, in your relationships, because either you're trying to undo some of the negative aspects, or because you are trying to go the other side and avoid those, and maybe perhaps make bad decisions now. So that's part one. I'm gonna next Friday really take a look at this very deep subject that he asked me about why we choose bad relationships and why we keep going back to them. It's a big deal. I want you to know that you are not judged by what has happened to you in your youth. Find somebody supportive to talk about this. And again, a licensed therapist. I know right now it is not easy to find a therapist. Not only are they a little inundated, but also, I don't know how well this video is going to date. We currently can't really go out and do public things right now because of the pandemic. So it's worth it to pursue it. And until then, find a non-judgmental, empathetic ear in which to talk about this. I am here for you as much as I can be, but again, seeking a therapist and their guidance is the number one goal here, and I hope that you do. All right, until next Friday.